Well, just half a year on from the first time an Australian underage team ever won a continental trophy in Asia since moving to the AFC. That very team, the Australian under-20 men's young Socceroos, are going to be taking on the world at the under-20 World Cup. Matt Olsen, hello to you. It's a very fun occasion. We have this underage team that we've seen lots in the A-League, all these players we're quite familiar with, and yet they're coming into this competition, obviously on the world stage, as continental champions, and we hope that they can do some pretty cool things.
The excitement heading into this, I'm someone who the youth teams are playing. I'm always going to be watching it. I really get that bug. Anything sort of Ollie Rouge, Joey's, the young Matildas over the years. There's been a lot of excitement there. This, with the prospect that's ahead of us, Asian champions, we are pretty excited for what's about to come in Chile. Just a shame that it is in South America, for the simple fact that these kickoff times will be definitely rough on a lot of us, especially a lot of us with Monday to Friday jobs. But no, this is excitement personified. I think there's a lot of really big questions to come with the caliber of opponent that we've got, and of course we will sort of touch on that. But I think the biggest thing that I sort of look at looking into this is really about the tactical profile, because you remember, these tournaments are for personal player development as well. So I think the biggest thing is just understanding the tactical limits of where this team can go. Otherwise, just take it in. We've got a team that's going to a World Cup as Asian champions, something that's only ever really happened once with the Senior World Cup in Russia. And that was a far cry from the 2015 team. So, the scale of what's ahead of us is very, very exciting.
And it's very cool because obviously a lot of our listeners will be fans of the A-Leagues as well. And I know you and I will be paying close attention, as you say, to the youth teams, no matter who they are, no matter who they're playing. But for the kind of average football punter who watches the A-League week in and week out, as I said, one of the really exciting things is a lot of these names is people that, fans will be familiar with. Yeah. Thinking of the likes of Alex Badalado, Daniel Benny, Max Caputo, Sebastian Esposito, who's just got his loan move to Melbourne Victory, Lucas Harrington, who's really done some special things at the Brisbane Roar since he came in. Paul Ocon-Exler is for me, one of the signings of the season for Sydney FC. Jalen Pearman, James Overy as well, who's in the Manchester United Academy. There's so many of those names that people will be familiar with. Partner that with the fact that, as we say, it is the third Asian crown that Australia has won, including the senior age groups, including the Men's Asian Cup, the Women's Asian Cup, and now the under-20s. This feels like a really good crack that we can go have at the world, and people will actually be invested in those storylines, those individual storylines that go along with it.
Well, something I wanted to point out a lot in my research is, I'm sort of looking at the crossover from previous U20 teams, which I've sort of wanted to encapsulate what's been going wrong over the years and what it took to get here. And I think a lot of it, again, probably lies with the tactical profile. I think a lot of it was that defensive-minded play where, Trevor Morgan rocked up after we got that sort of training camp in Yokohama, I think it was, arrived in Shenzhen, and it was like, we're actually going to take the initiative and go on the front foot here. And it came with a very interesting-looking team. But more to the point on the personal stories here, I look at that, pairing of Daniel Benny and Nathan Amantitis, who are two, wider players in their system. They were part of a 17s team that made the quarterfinal and lost to Japan, who, could have easily been a Joey's generation that redefined the script for, the history of the Joeys and potentially won some silverware there. They just happened to have a very, very tough quarterfinal opponent. Otherwise, that was a team that should have played at the World Cup. And I look at the fact that, Nathan and Daniel are both going to be in this team now as Asian champions, taking on, powerhouses in Argentina and Italy. And I just think that's very, very exciting. It's brilliant for their development, let alone the fact that Daniel, along with someone like Jalen, they've made it all the way through Perth, had their senior minutes, and are now, achieving very successful things with a youth program at QPR that seems to be unstoppable at the moment. I mean, they've won silverware at QPR, if I'm not mistaken. I look at the squad and it's just hard not to be excited. But this is such an unprecedented time for Australian football. Just looking at some of the talent that we've got coming through, and it's not just this level. It's the likes of Dester Irankunda at senior level, who's hitting his straps. Yep. Someone like Geordie Boss, who we've got firing at Feyenoord. And you just think that in a couple of years, these names will probably be there as well. Let alone what they're doing. You refer to the sort of the A-League talent as well, let alone to what they're doing at A-League level. There's a group here that can achieve some really, really special things. So it's excitement in that way, but also when looking specifically at the tournament, you just really have to be confident in their ability to achieve a lot, especially with a forgiving tournament format. The 24-team format always works out pretty well, and that could very well be the case on this occasion.
Yep, so that'll be 24 teams, all in groups of 4, and we'll get to Australia's opponents in a second. Then we go to the round of 16. So you have that 2 qualify plus some lucky losers as well. So as you say, it is forgiving. Now, the fixtures that we're coming up against, as you say, some big names, it's Italy, Argentina, and then Cuba as well. For the people who are maybe not too familiar with the youth programs around the world, how should we be... Obviously, Italy and Argentina, you think big powerhouses, and that's going to be tough. Is that representative at this age group as well?
Look, game 1 is Italy, so I'll start there. The Euros that they played to qualify for the tournament was a very, very strange tournament, to be honest. Not only do UEFA really put international football on the back burner, and fair enough, you've got things like the UEFA Youth League and things like that, where they're pretty prestigious tournaments in their own right. They don't need to be having international windows all the time, But this was the under 19s Euros of 2024, held in Northern Ireland, which I was pretty miffed by. Seems like a really odd spot for a Euros, but fair enough. And this team got knocked out in the semi-finals to Spain in the 100th minute of a semi-final. So pretty stiff competition to be coming up against, right? But the biggest thing that I immediately realised, not only did I look through the squad and see your usual names, Juventus, Inter Milan, there's a Real Madrid product, Emmanuel Benjamin, who... Again, I don't know a lot about his profile. Probably should have researched it a little bit further if I was going to bring him up by name. But just someone that, if he's in the Castillo in Real Madrid... we've got a big challenge coming up against us. But what I actually want to take away from that is the fact that, and I'll just roll some names off the tongue, not necessarily player names, but team names. So Juventus only have 2 players at the tournament. Inter Milan only have 2 players at the tournament. Roma only has 1 player at the tournament, and AC Milan only has 1 player at the tournament. What this actually is shaping up to me is to say that these are guys who are already loanees of Serie B clubs, successful lower Serie A clubs. And where they're heading with their development right now is already streets above a lot of the teams at the tournament. So I would actually go so far as to say that with the senior minutes some of these players may already be getting, and they're a squad that's on the younger side, a lot of 17-year-olds, a lot of 18-year-olds, this team is really going places. And for our first up opponent, I looked at it on paper. I thought Argentina have had some really successful U20 teams. You'd kind of classify Italy as the de facto pot 2 team, which means it's already a bit of a grudge match to be coming up against first. But the more I look into this, the more I realise Italy actually will be one of the best teams at the tournament. So for a first game, it worries me. And I just want to highlight kind of what I'm talking about here. There is a forward, I don't really, again, get his full tactical profile, and I think if there's one thing to take away from this, how players are utilised at U20 international level compared to their senior minutes, it's a bit hard to say. But this guy, Ishmael Conte, is someone that, again, is a bit of a forward, potentially a bit of a wide man for Empoli, and he's 2006 born and has already had 12 senior starts for them. So... that's the level of what we're talking about. That's Serie A minutes straight into the legs of a 2006 born player. That's going to be really tough. So we can say all we want about, Daniel Benny, probably a like for like comparison, someone that's getting those minutes at QPR, but you're getting them at U21 level. That has to just be different, right? So Italy a lot to fear about with their profile for sure. As a major
it's interesting.
Threat.
That the question on like senior team minutes, and obviously we can go and look down the Australian lineup, and you can make the very same argument, right? And I'm going to ask you a question about that in a little bit more depth later on. But the value of minutes in the A League, and it's fascinating. But Italy, obviously, we have such a high level. And I remember we did an interview with Alessandro Ciccatti on this channel over a year ago now, I think, and he obviously has the experience in both of those systems. And one thing he said is, for every dozen or 2 dozen players in maybe an age group in Australia that are trying to force their way into one position, you've got thousands in Italy that are, trying to funnel themselves into one position. So that the strength in the quality of the individuals they put out is very high.
No, for sure. And I think, even, obviously with Perth being aligned with Catania, I think I didn't really see myself making the segue, but you look at sort of Gabriel Popovich, who's like situation from playing senior minutes at Perth as a teenager, going over to Catania, who, yeah, okay, they're a probably upper echelon Serie C team, obviously very well backed by Ross Pellegrini and co. But that's the Serie C. And the Serie C is a 60-team league split geographically, right? So if Gabby can't really make ends in the Serie C, it just goes to show you the profile, because that's someone who probably could be cracking in to A-League minutes and may even get a lot of A-League minutes with Perth this season, you know? So I just think that the comparison there is ginormous, and it actually really highlights how rare and how valued probably the golden generation was even 20 years ago when Serie A was the creme de la creme of world football. But also, it just goes to show you how tough it would be for Kakati and for a lot of these guys who try and make it. You know, you look at, again, I go back to Jordi Boss making his way through the Eredivisie. It's the Eredivisie. It's an absolutely top-class league, and we've got an Aussie really, going through strides there. And so, no, exactly. So I come back to the fact that it's a big gap, but it is an interesting comparison of, if you're getting senior minutes at A-League level, how does it compare when you're playing against senior players from a club like Empoli, who, hardly, the biggest club going around in the Italian football scene? How does it compare? And it's a really, really good test to go up against first. But this also, I think, comes back to my initial sort of assessment as a whole. My sort of overarching point here is, if you're Trevor Morgan, tactically, do you approach it the same way you would approach playing Japan? Because if we've just successfully blown Japan out of the water 2-0, is that what it looks like when you're going up against these guys with senior Serie B minutes? It's a fascinating dilemma, and one that, they must be sitting in their hotel in Valparaiso right now, really asking those questions. So, yeah.
And I think they have to take a lot of inspiration for that Japan game, and for people that don't remember that tournament, I think it was the semi-finals, right?
Yes.
Semi-finals of this Asian Cup that Australia won. This is the first time that we've, really seen, at least as far as I can remember, the style of game of football that an Australian team of any age group has played against Japan was one of just absolute dominance. And again, maybe it's that senior minute argument, that just more experience, that our players maybe are worth $1 more at that level. But it's just fascinating. And hopefully they can take that mindset, obviously Japan being the gold standard pretty much on our side of Asia in terms of where to look for our football. Hopefully they take that forward, and against the likes of Italy, and we'll get on to Argentina now, who I invite you to talk about. These are big names in world football, and hopefully we can go into these games with, a very similar attitude.
Yeah, I mean, look, with Argentina, I more immediately sort of refrain back to something that happened in 2023, which you probably are not aware of, and I think for a lot of people are probably not aware of. But there's a lot of demons in the closet for the program. Now, the transition of players, it's hard to say that these are any of the same players, and I've tried to sort of look at the age bracket there. There might be one or two spattering around from this, but basically in 2023, and I will make this very, very brief because I'm about to touch on a very hot-button geopolitical issue, but trust me, it's relevant. I'm going to talk about Israel for a second, because basically there was a tournament that was scheduled for Indonesia to be hosting it. There was a Indonesian-themed mascot, Indonesian-themed branding. A very popular Indonesian band wrote a song, and that song was obviously still produced by FIFA for the tournament. But because Israel qualified out of Europe, you can imagine what happened.
Chaos ensued.
Yep, exactly. Chaos ensued. The tournament ends up in Argentina, who have, on a whim, basically said, we're now hosting this tournament. We've got a successful team that's qualified. We're going to put everything into this. We have to win a World Cup on home soil. And for those kids, it was a lot of pressure, because this Argentinian team have just, they've not done too well. They've been knocked out in the round of 16, losing to Nigeria. And again, I come back to the fact that even if there's only one or two players in this generation of squad, listen, that's a big emotional weight that they've obviously just bared, and that U20 program is now stepping into another World Cup on South American soil, and you can imagine for the program, for the FA, how that feels, especially with a lot going on in the domestic front in Argentinian football, with it being a mess and all sorts of rough things going on with corruption. So I'll bring you all of that background simply to say to you that this team is going to have a lot of fire in the belly, and really,
lots of proof,
exactly. That being said, I look at their record and, I really want to vouch for this team in the same way that I have for Italy. But really going through CONMEBOL, that they really actually struggled. They played because of a weird sort of group format. They didn't go into a knockout bracket. They just went into another round robin group as their final stage. They failed to beat Colombia twice, and they failed to beat Brazil twice, having played them both in their group and then in the knockout phase round robin at the end. So that bodes sort of, I don't want to say it bodes really well and that it's a sign that we're going to go out and beat the Argentinians like we did at the Tokyo Olympics. Not necessarily what I'm implying. I'm just saying that clearly there's a lot that's been going on historically now with the Argentinian U20 program where there's a lot to be desired. Another thing I really want to point to is in previous generations, you would have gone through an Argentinian team like this and there would have been a lot more on offer for players who, even at the age of sort of 17, 18, they've already made a move to Europe or they're already like super established at South American clubs. Look at Esteval.
Lionel Messi, for example.
Well, yeah. But look in a more recent example, Esteval coming out of Brazil, right? That's the profile of player that you're looking for. I found one who can maybe match that. A midfielder named Thomas Perez for Porto. Now, again, on the tactical profile, I could look into it and say, he's going to do this on the ball and he's a holding midfielder, he's a winger, whatever. But I didn't want to look too deeply into it because, again, I just think that the tactical profile that you get is bound to be very different. But this is a guy who, again, has had senior minutes, 6 senior games for Porto. So that coming into that is rough, but then, this is actually in total over the whole 23-man squad or 25-man squad, only 5 players in Europe. And 1 in the MLS, the rest of them all locally based. So senior minutes, and I would say right now, with the state of the Argentinian league and a lot of the issues that they're having, senior minutes in Argentina, okay, the tournament's in Chile, maybe more familiar surroundings if you want to make that argument, compared to, a lot of our senior minutes that we're getting, and even, again, I go back to the example of youth minutes in England and Germany and wherever else. I'd go so far as to say that we actually don't match up terribly against Argentina. I would say that the total profile is fairly good, and I would really like to sort of hang the diagnostics over why they failed to have those results against Brazil and Colombia, because clearly if there's some demons in the closet there, and this is a team that really desires to sort of avenge what happened in 2023, they've not got off to the best start, at the continental level. So I'm very, very intrigued by that looking in, and again, not a lot of European experience, which for a country like Argentina, that is really rare.
Okay, so a potential trend line of gradual easiness as you continue through the fixture. I'm sure a lot of casual viewers would look and see Cuba and probably would expect that trend to continue. Is that a fair assessment at under 20 level?
Cuba's squad has been released, but listen, these are guys that are playing domestically, almost exclusively domestically. And again, Cuba, not exactly a country where this information is easy to find. I go back to an interview I had with Nick Olsen years ago, and he was talking about how when he moved to Kuwait, he couldn't even get his own team to source data correctly on their opponents and source data for themselves and scout their opponents properly, just because the data was that hard to find in a country like Kuwait. And listen, with Cuba, it's the same thing. This team is a total enigma. I come back to the fact that in previous cycles, they've had a few guys out of the US and MLS, a few guys in here as well who, have probably been products out of the USL and MLS, into Miami. Obviously, very, very strong cultural ties between native Cubans and Florida. So, again, I've got a few guys in there who may have minutes out of the US, but are still Cuban league players. And I reflect on that and I think, their team's probably not the best that it's been, because those minutes for guys, let alone who might be making it to Europe, or the US, they're just not really there. Also in CONCACAF qualifying, you could actually argue that the team really even shouldn't be here. They've dragged themselves through penalties against Honduras, and in a game that flowed back and forward. Again, I can't say with certainty what's happened on the game. I've not really looked up any footage of it, but I'm just guessing that there's a lot of, the usual antics and a lot of tense moments like that, where a team like Honduras could very easily be here on that stage, and I think we'd have more respect, I think it's fair to say, for a team like Honduras than we would Cuba. I will highlight one player, though. I promise I'm not completely in the dark here. There's a man named Romario Torres, who's named after, of course, the Adelaide legend, Romario. And he scored the winning penalty in that shootout against Honduras, and again has a profile domestically that's at least of note. I've been able to look at a few clubs that he's played for, and I'd say again someone that for CONCACAF level, definitely the best of the best that you're going to get of youth talent. But again, that's the extent of the scouting I've really been able to do. The rest of the squad, I said this to a few people as a bit of a passing joke. The rest of this squad may as well play on Mars, because that's sort of what trying to scout Cuban domestic football is like. So look, I don't really have a lot to say, but I know that again, when you're in a World Cup scenario, nothing comes easy, and I mean they would know that. However, again, I go back to what does Trevor Morgan do in preparing for a game like that? Of course, they're probably going to get better data on us, but you'd have to think, and especially with goals and the potential of having 2 losses against Italy and Argentina, goals having to be the qualifying mechanism for us to get through in third.
Good manner, yeah.
We'll need to approach that game very aggressively, and I expect that's how Australia approach the game.
All right, fascinating. So there are the 3 opponents, Italy, Argentina, and Cuba. Those games are played. The first one is the 29th of September. That's a 6 a.m. kickoff, and it gets slightly better from there. Of course, just for Matt's benefit, I'm talking Eastern Australian time. Argentina is on the 2nd of October at 9 a.m., and then Cuba the 5th of October at 10 a.m.